Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TEPSA Talk podcast. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. We are thrilled every week to bring you different thought leaders from around the world, and today we have none other than the amazing Liz Sherman on with us today. Liz, kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I would say thank you so much, Todd, for inviting me to be a part of this. As far as like my education background, I've been an educator. I think it's 15. I honestly, like, after a while, you lose sort of like the count of it. But I've taught in several different states from Florida, Georgia, California, Michigan. And during that time, I've also been an administrator as being an assistant director of special education and then a director of special education at a K through 8 school. And eventually, though, I actually volunteered to shift my role into being the special education coordinator so that I could actually be in the classroom more as we were designing our true co-teaching model across our campus so that I could also be modeling it for our teachers. And yeah,
I love it.
That's quick and easy as far as
I love it. Well, we've, for those of you that have been following along with the podcast, we've had a wide variety of topics and we've covered even some instructional pieces. And so we wanted to bring this conversation today about special education because, when people are hired into the administrative role, whether that's an assistant principal, or even higher up, they may not have a lot of experience with the special education world, yet they're now placed over it and making decisions that affect that. And so we decided to have you on today just to kind of talk about this and talk about some misconceptions and some ways administrators can support and different things like that. And so I love that you have a variety of perspectives from the special education world. And so let's just dive into it and think, administrators here today may be thinking, I really want to support my special education teachers first. I want to make sure that I know that their role is a little bit different than a general ed teacher or any other role on campus. And so how can I best support them?
I think one way is just simply talking to them. Because every school is going to be so different for what a teacher needs because it's going to be on what students need. And that's going to look a variety of ways. And especially when it's very popular now to have inclusive programs. However, they're truly probably not always actually inclusive.
Right.
And it's being able to get those teachers' voices and thoughts, and as well as the general education teachers too, honestly. It has to be a sort of a whole team thing because from some of my experiences, unfortunately, it's been like a us versus them, meaning like a special education versus general education versus admin, when actually you're supposed to be working cohesively together. So when you can really talk and be like, okay, what are our students' needs realistically, instead of saying we're going to do an inclusive program and we're all trying to make everybody fit into this box that doesn't even work for your school.
Yeah.
You can then be like, okay, so our kiddos need this. So what does that mean you need? What does that mean we need as our program so it actually can be sustainable and work in a functional day-to-day basis rather than, there's been the moments where for the first few months at a school where we're like, okay, this is not working because your principal is in the hallways all day trying to, whether it's helping students in crisis,
Right.
and it's because the program doesn't work for them.
Right.
And then teachers are all over the place and not actually giving the best services and support to students. Being able to sit down and have a very real and authentic talk and conversation, I think, is key at first.
Well, and I think you made a great point of bringing people together. I think it's part of that is just starting those conversations, but involving the general ed teachers in that collaboration, that conversation as well. Because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about the role of a special education program, a special education student, or any of I think everybody has a viewpoint, and a lot of times we're not all aligned because we don't actually sit and have those conversations. What do you see as some pretty common misconceptions when it comes to special education?
One of the biggest is that special education is a place. It's a room in the school building. And in reality, IDEA, our federal law, that is not what it is. It is that it is services being provided to the student. And yes, there is least restrictive environment. So there are going to be moments in which it's going to be in the best interest for the student to learn and grow educationally, to have maybe some pull-out support in a small group or one-on-one setting. But that doesn't mean that's the go-to. And I think that is one of the biggest. And there was actually in February, I was at Michigan's CEC, which is Council of Exceptional Children State Conference. And there was a speaker there, and they said it so beautifully. And it honestly took me back, because I was like, oh my gosh, I am so guilty of that, of referring it as to I'm the resource room teacher, or I'm the resource room. And even just saying it like that, you are saying special education is a place, rather than saying, oh, our resource program is being provided in this room. So I think that's a huge misconception right there, that it has to be in one place, and that's the only place special education services can be provided.
Now, sometimes from an administrator perspective, when we start having those conversations, that special education isn't a place, it's a service that's being provided to these students. Sometimes general ed teachers get a little uncomfortable, or not as supportive having the students in the classroom, because they might be disruptive, or they might have to really change the way the instruction looks or anything like that. As an administrator, how can I really support my general ed teachers and being ready to take on any kid that comes to their class, and trying to get them the supports they need to be successful?
Well, I think one is acknowledging, though, general education teachers, that their feelings are valid. Because again, we are, as we all know, in a teacher shortage across this country, and that's impacting in a huge way. And because of that, that means special education caseloads are well beyond the servable range. So even though a special education teacher wants to be providing these supports, sometimes they might be, especially in an elementary, they might be split across the grades K through 5. I mean, for some of my years when I was a teacher, I was K through 8 as the teacher. Like, and that's not a sustainable way. So it is being able to, one, listen to them and validate that, be like, yeah. And because they also haven't probably had the training or the schooling to know, like, what are those? And then it can be like, okay, so asking them again, what is it that you need? What would make this more helpful for you? And then seeing if that means if there's a certain training that needs to be provided and then followed up on. If there are certain supports, maybe there's a time during their day, they're like, if I could have a paraprofessional or an instructional associate come in this classroom for 30 minutes when we're doing centers, because our student is just having a difficult time being able to do things independently, like really getting down and pinpointing what is the need and being able to support in that manner and being able to fulfill that. And sometimes it might be, for me, when I was an administrator, it was me going into the classroom. It was when we got a new student who needed a one-on-one aid, because that was already in their IEP when they came, and they needed all of these supports, and we didn't have that at the time. So we had to go through the hiring process. I was that aide. That meant, yes, I didn't necessarily get to all the tasks I was supposed to do on a daily basis, but the most important thing was giving that student what they needed, which meant that teacher was getting what they needed, and the rest of that class was getting what they needed as well.
I love that. And one of the things that I think I keep coming to my head as you're talking about this is, I think sometimes too, we don't provide enough supports, or we're struggling with how to do that, or how to have those conversations or anything like that. Because as an administrator too, we haven't necessarily spent time getting to know those students and the abilities they're working with, and how unique and amazing they are. And I think sometimes, again, coming back to that whole misconceptions idea, I think even for me, I had experience with special education students as a teacher, but not to the depth of an entire campus when you become an administrator. And just getting down in there and spending time with those students gave me such more appreciation for the types of supports that we could be providing. Because just like you said, as you were talking about, sometimes the administrator even has to get in there and help out where necessary, because it's not just about that student. It's about that teacher, it's about that student, and it's about all the other students in the room. They're all under our care. And so figuring out how to meet all their needs is a struggle at times, but it's such a necessity.
100%. And it's remembering too, I was thinking of one other misconception about how, people will term special education students, but, disabled students, students that receive services, they are general education students first. That is how they first enroll. And then this is just another layer. It's very similar to students who are emerging language learners. They're first a general education student, and then they get these services on top. And with that, yeah, it's always a thing of having to learn. And that, again, from my experience, myself included, special education is such a broad spectrum.
Yeah.
It is not like, I think that's another misconception. Yeah. And
Yeah.
when I sort of like termed it at my one campus in California, because I had a teacher say like, well, but what do we do for this kiddo? Like, you're the special education teacher. I go, yes, I have some ideas. I have some supports. Mm-hmm. And I've never actually had to teach a student that has had these type of needs, these type of services. I go, you are this grade level teacher, let's say it was a first grade level. I'd be like, well, can't you just go teach fifth grade math? And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I go, well, right. It's a spectrum, right? Like, we all have this.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have to be willing to know that it's gonna probably be a little bumpy and a little messy at first. And that's okay. Doesn't mean that it's fun necessarily. Yeah. Sometimes it's stressful. But if we can continue to learn and grow, and again, each student's needs are going to be different.
Yep.
And you have to just learn how to be able to embrace and welcome and put your ego to the side a bit in it to say, yep, that did not work at all like I thought it was going to do. And I've had to do that many times. I'm like, back to the drawing board. And with that, I've had some incredible paraprofessionals and instructional associates. They are a wealth of knowledge. I think sometimes we maybe dismiss them because of, how they're classified, to speak. But there's sometimes who are working the closest.
Yeah.
Our students that have these needs and have the best information or ideas on how we can support them too.
I love that. Well, another question I'd love to get your perspective on is, as we work with students and begin to identify that there are some additional needs that we're going to have to meet, at some point, we also have to have that conversation with the families. And as you know through your experience, and as I know through mine, some families take those conversations a little bit better than other families. And so what's your advice for an administrator who maybe hasn't had successful conversations with parents or is nervous about how parents are going to receive some information? What advice do you have for those administrators?
One is proactive is always going to be better than a reactive way of approaching it. It's not until everything's going down in flames that you'd be like, hey, by the way, so we actually think we should be doing X, Y, and Z when you've maybe known this for a while. It is engaging with empathy and hearing those parents, because they have a different perspective of the world. When their child was born, they may have had a vision of how their lives are going to be, and that's changed. And not saying that's for the worse, not saying that's for bad. It's just for different.
Yeah.
And having to be able to listen to, okay, well, what are those concerns? What are your hopes? And this is something I've honestly done with all of my families in the beginning of school years. not only do I do like, student interest surveys and try to get really in depth of building those relationships, but building also the caregiver relationships early on, making those positive phone calls out, making those calls home before school even starts. Like, hey, I see your child's transferring to us. We're so excited. I would love one, if they are transferring, you should be meeting because there's the 30-day interim that you should be holding nonetheless.
Right.
Doing it from that viewpoint and perspective of that you care for their child too. And you want to know, what is your perspective? What are things that you are hoping for your child? What are you hoping out of their education here? I also talk to families about, I'm trying to think of your kiddo as an 18-year-old, as a graduation. And I know that especially when they're in kinder, they're like, whoa. I go, I know. I don't want to think about it either. However, we want to consider them being an independent adult.
Yeah.
As much as they can be in most cases.
Yeah.
So how can we get there? How do you envision that? Because then if you're just getting, again, so much I know I'm saying is going around talking, but if you're just going to them and being like, okay, well, this is the new evaluation. I need you to sign this, just sign this paper and move on. They don't feel like they're a part of the process.
No. And I think that happens sometimes. As I talk to, I hear that happening again and again, where it's like, we're trying to get all this done. Like, we have to get all this done. Come here, sign this, check this. And I think there's a lot that parents have to digest. And I think 100%. You made such a great point there where you said their perspective of their child or the world or the way we're talking about things, it may be different than yours. And that's okay. It doesn't mean they're wrong or they're bad. We have to take that into consideration and have that empathy with them in those conversations.
I would say, and as well as like, so because you mentioned there is the paperwork. Like, let's not lie. There is special there's a lot of paperwork, and it's all due on, and it's a legal document. So it's all due on legal timelines, which is another pressure on educators. But being able to send home drafts of an IEP, the portions that you can legally, right? We're not going to be doing any predetermination here, as well as any evaluations that are taking place, and letting the parents being able to read that like on their own free time. And I always would send them like, you mark it up, you write all over it, you bring questions. I'm like, that is what we're here for. It's not for you just to read it and be like, okay, like, sure, I got it. No, because I sometimes read those evaluations. I'm like, whoa. Let me process this, because it can be so overwhelming and so much. And trying to really break it down, quite honestly, in more common terms. Let's not use all the acronyms. Let's not use all of the educational terminology, or explain what it means, so it's not such a process for them to try to digest this, especially in an IEP meeting, and being like, okay, well, here it is. All right, so good, right? Okay, let's move on. Like, that's not going to win them over in any way, because how would anybody feel in that? You'd be defensive in any manner.
Well, for the administrators listening today, if you want them to walk away with just like, at least I hope you heard this, like, what's the one thing you want them to make sure they walk away with today?
I want them to walk away. This is like probably my biggest thing is, do what's right for your school and your students. Special education is not this box that I feel it's been created to be. So if you see a need, as I tell teachers and I tell admin, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. If you know that this is best for your school, but you're getting pushback from this area or that area, but you've heard it from your teachers, you've heard it from your stakeholders, the caregivers, then go ahead and try it. That you have to do what's right for your students in your building and your teachers.
I love that. Well, Liz, if somebody was listening today and they're like, I want to connect with you, or I want to get some of your resources, or I want to learn from you more, how can they connect with you?
I am on Instagram at Inclusion Disco. Yes. Very vibey like that. And all my other social media accounts, like that's also my email address, Facebook, soon to be a website. So getting there, but that would be Instagram is probably the quickest way to contact me.
Awesome. So if you have some more special ed questions or you want to learn more from Liz, I got to tell you, I love following you on Instagram because you share so many great thought-provoking images and resources. And so I definitely encourage people to go follow you on Inclusion Disco on Instagram if they have Instagram. Thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of our TEPSA Talk podcast. And join in next week with another all-new episode.